I'm Mandy Jenkins, and I'm a JSK Fellow at Stanford. Well, I think it's important to note that fake news has been a problem long before the 2016 election, and I think it just really got more noticed by the media and by people after that because of how the election ended and some of the early reports about potential manipulation from other countries. But in my work, we actually had been seeing this going on for a long time in the United States and especially overseas. There had been a lot of that kind of fake news and disinformation going around that was influencing elections, influencing how people thought about things. And I think what we've learned is, for one thing, that people weren't aware that they were being manipulated, and now are at least a little bit more conscious of what that might look like. I'm not saying that they're perfect at it, but I think pretty much everyone in America that consumes news in any fashion now knows that they have to be a little bit more careful. And the things that we want to look out for, and it's a kind of different lessons between the public and the media, but one thing that is similar is looking out for the people who are trying to influence the way that you think about things. And in the case of media, trying to influence how we cover it. There are bad actors of all sorts out there that are doing this. It's not just foreign governments and shady agents of various places, but it's also just regular people online who are either doing it for profit, because they're getting a lot of advertising money, driving that to fake news websites. But there's also people who literally just do it to mess with people. And we see that so often in some of the biggest breaking news stories. If we're in a situation where lots of reaction is happening on social media and suddenly there's coalescing around who the perpetrator is, who the victims are, and none of that is coming from official sources, we have to be really careful about that, because often I've found, and what we've seen in my work when I was at Storyful, my last job, that is often the work of people who are intentionally planting fake information. Sometimes just to get back at people they don't like, sometimes just to make the media make a mistake, and sometimes just because they think it's funny. Well, I think that's going to continue to happen. It's just more that we have to be more aware of it when we see it and to call it out when we see it. One of the issues is that, for one thing, there's just a lot of information out there. There's a lot of different news sources, and regular people don't always have the time to really go and check that out and to be really critical of that. And if it's not the time, sometimes it's just the skill of opening up a site and knowing what to look for, to have an idea of how can I evaluate if this source is real. And they're not even necessarily driven to do so, because we are hardwired to believe the things that we already agree with. So if there's a story that backs up things that you already think, you might not have ever really said it out loud, but you definitely think that's true, then you're going to be more inclined to think this is a real story. You're not going to think critically about how should I make sure that this is something that isn't trying to trick me, because they already believe it. And those biases are what drive us to select a fake story and share a fake story. And most of the time it's driven from a somewhat good place of, I think that this is a story that either is really important to me and I want other people in my life to see this because it's important to me, or this is something I think is going to help them. But you see a lot with the spread of fake news around health remedies and science information and things like that. People think that this is something that's going to help the people around them. They're not trying to be malicious, but they also haven't necessarily checked out what the source was of that, or where this information came from, and if it's something that they can trust. Well, one of the biggest challenges in debunking a fake story, especially for an amateur doing it, not someone who does this professionally, but even sometimes for those of us that do it professionally, is understanding the source. Where did this information originally come from? Because even in professional media that is trustworthy, we're not always great at revealing that. Saying, where did this original piece of info come from? Is it an anonymous source somewhere? That can be suspect to some people. We rely on anonymous sources quite a bit. Is this something that we got from a report? Is this from someone else's news report? And often that can be really hidden within a story, especially if you think about social media and aggregation. That this isn't the original story, and the original story is 4 links away. And it can take a lot of digging just to figure out who originally had this information, who originally gave this quote, What's that person's background? Are they actually qualified to talk about this? How do they know what they know? That it can be a lot of work for a consumer to do that, and that's a really big challenge if we're not showing sort of where the information comes from, but also explaining why the people that we trust in media to tell us what's happening, why they're qualified to do that, and how their information is really important to the story. I've learned several really great insights from talking to people who have been in this position, and I found that all of them have actually really good reasons for the decisions that they make. They're not decisions I would make, but it's made a lot of sense for them. And a few of the ones I've seen that really they have in common are, for one, really being a little freaked out and like distrustful of the power of media to shape a narrative. Much like saying that more people are aware of disinformation, one of the things about that is they're way more aware when someone's trying to manipulate how they feel. And the media does that all the time. That's something that we're built to do. We teach people how to write to make you think a certain way or feel a certain way. That's how you know you've written really well, but people are way more aware of that. And they're afraid of someone trying to control them, but also of who gets to be the heroes and who gets to be the villains of different stories. And they're afraid that they might be the villain at some point, that they might be someone that gets made fun of in a big shame mob on Twitter, and there's suddenly 15 stories about how they did or said this thing. So that's really scary. An overload of technology and an overload of news is definitely a problem as well. There's just way too much going on. It's very easy to get sucked into technology and lose time there. But also it's easy to lose time and to kind of lose yourself in just this overwhelming waterfall of information that's around you, to take the time to really sort that out. It's very tempting to just close it off and just say, you know what, I don't want any of this, or I only want this stuff from my friends and my circle. That's a tempting way to kind of shut the noise down. And also, everybody overestimates their ability to actually evaluate news. Media and information literacy is a real problem in every age group and at every level of education, of people that think that they would know how to do that, and people who think that they do that, and maybe it works for them sometimes, but it doesn't work for them all the time, that everyone overestimates their abilities to do that, which has been pretty interesting to see that as well. Well, I think that one of the things that we need to do to fight fake news, one is focusing on the audience, focusing on the people I've been talking to. You know, one of the themes I did see was this idea that they don't feel like media really cares about their issues, especially on a local level. So getting more journalists out on the ground, interacting in communities that haven't necessarily seen them very often or haven't had their stories told very often is really helpful for that, because the only interactions they have with news are really negative, but they're on this national scale. And rebuilding trust in those areas can help prevent the believing of fake news in the first place. And then the purveyors of that are not going to be as successful. And I'd say another element of that too is to prevent the fake news creators from being successful is to be aware of how they manipulate media and to stop falling for that. Every single day, someone in media is falling for a manipulation tactic, either by Twitter bots trying to make something trend that isn't actually a trend, people who've decided that they want to make a story out of what someone did or said that actually isn't a story, or they fall for the president who uses it as a huge distraction tactic all the time. That is all forms of media manipulation, that we have important stories to tell. We should not allow ourselves to be manipulated into telling stories that aren't real or don't have priority.